Thank you. Well, we're going to now invite our next speaker up, but certainly Marina set the context for some of the issues that have been teed up, and hopefully our friend Rodney has some solutions, or at least an analysis of it. Rodney, actually, I've gotten to know him over the last, much better over the last year or so, is the Assistant Commissioner for Data and Technology at the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. And he came to us came to my former employer as a data analyst at the New York City Planning Department, where he is now in the throes of not just TPEP data, but I think probably the first ever Uber data that a government has ever seen, and he's been modeling and analyzing it as it comes in. And I think New York City's TLC and really Rodney and his team are so progressive. There's nobody doing what they've done in just a very short period of time. And they're making policy decisions, fortunately, based upon fact, not fiction, which for many years we were making them based upon a he said, she said thing with surveys being done which weren't necessarily accurate. Now there's actual data, and to his credit and the city's credit, and Commissioner Joshi and also the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, there's now an open platform where you can obtain this data, which was once very difficult to download and get onto a server and on a flash drive, and now it's very easily accessible and includes pickup and drop-offs of not just taxi cabs, but all of the for-hire vehicles, black cars, limos, Ubers, Lyfts, whatever you like. And I also want to thank Rodney for serving as a judge in our first ever UTRC IATR hackathon. We had, and Marta alluded to it this morning, and we're going to have the results of that hackathon soon. But the hackathon was basically an international challenge, including cities, universities, government regulators, private industry from all over the world, from as far as NYIT's Abu Dhabi campus and the regulators in the United Arab Emirates. It included UC Berkeley, Purdue University, as well as NYIT and UTRC's City College folks. We also had regulators who gave us data, not just from New York City's TLC, but also from the City of Chicago, the City of Philadelphia, the District of Columbia, and also the San Francisco MTA. So these universities and regulators have put together the first ever data commons, which we now share with the UTRC and various universities, where we're tapping into it for students and academics. So if any of you are interested, just let me know. We'll get you on the mailing list and we'll share the data. The data is an open platform. It's available for everybody, for researchers and students, and they're already using it. And the hackathon results are going to be announced very, very soon. So I want to thank Rodney also for serving as a judge. And without further ado, Assistant Commissioner Rodney Stiles. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Well, thank you, Matt, for the very kind introduction, and also for giving a lot of background, so I really don't have to hit on some of the things that you mentioned. But yeah, I just want to echo some of the themes that you brought up. I think, what we've really tried to do is not just obtain the data, and I'll show you some trends from that data today, especially in the, not TNC, where there are actually for-hire vehicles in New York, fully licensed and regulated, but Uber, Lyft, those companies. But also making that data publicly available and getting as much of it as possible on the city's open data platform. And one of the things I really enjoy in my work is hearing from academics and from students and hearing about their projects and being able to collaborate with people in analyzing that data. Since we use it day in and day out, we really know it pretty well and can, I'd like to think, help a student out in really trying to dive deeper and to think about more important issues. Two of those issues that are the subject of this panel, which I'll try to talk a little bit about, but at a higher level, hopefully we can get into some good discussion in the panel as well, are on equity and accessibility. And what I really want to talk about today is, in terms of equity, is the geographic reach of services in New York, and then a little bit about how we use data to actually implement some, I think, very forward-thinking accessibility programs in New York City. So as the Assistant Commissioner of Data and Technology, my team, what is it that we do? And I always have to explain this to people. simple. I'm not an IT person. I get a lot of proposals from IT companies trying to sell me stuff. That's not what we do. We think about technology policy and how it touches transportation, but really think about it in two ways. One of those ways is what we do is to introduce technology to these highly regulated industries. And so what do I mean by that? One of those things that we've done, and this started under Matt's leadership at TLC, is introduce technology into all taxis. So the technology systems in cabs, which originally were meant to make it so that you could pay by credit card in any cab, also brought us electronic trip records, which allow us to move from that very anecdotal evidence that the TLC used to hear about, and to really look and do data-driven policy making. Not just look at a sample of trip records, have real, not handwritten origin and destination, but latitude, longitude, and be able to look at an entire data set. From an entire year's worth to now, this has been going on since 2009 that we've been collecting this data. So now we're getting on 7, 8 years worth of data that we've collected. The other side of the role is, what I'd like to say, is to introduce regulation to, and I'm going to put this in quotes, technology companies. Because I really do think that Uber, especially in New York, and operating black car basis, is a transportation company and not a technology company. And there's a few, I think, really important things that have happened in New York that set it apart from the rest of the country. One of these things is that these companies, as I said, they're not TNCs, they're not transportation network companies here. We slotted them into an existing framework that already existed. So that means that they have the same education requirements, the same fingerprint background checks, a constant safety and criminal monitoring that we do of all of our drivers. They also all their vehicles carry 24-hour commercial liability insurance, and not this on-again, off-again insurance that is pretty prevalent in the rest of the country. And then I think the really important thing, and what we're going to talk about today, is the data reporting requirement that these companies have. So starting in 2015, we had all this great data from taxis back to 2009 when we introduced green taxis, which, by the way, we introduced by looking at data and showing that 94% of taxi trips were originating in Manhattan or at the airports. And we could make a very strong case for why we wanted, an equity case for why we wanted to provide that same level of service outside of the Manhattan CBD. We had data going back for a while from those two parts of our regulated industries, but not from this other part, not from our livery companies, our luxury limousine companies, and not from our black car companies and black car spaces where companies like Uber and Lyft have settled in our framework. And we saw that as problematic because it was becoming the largest, and it was already a large portion of our regulated industries, but the largest and growing the fastest, and the one that we needed to understand the most about. We needed to see what was going on, not just take clips from Uber saying this was their growth, this is how many trips they were doing per day. No, I want to see how many trips, where they're happening, which drivers are doing them. We really need to be able to study in detail how this service is being across our city to make any reasonable policy changes. So I'm going to talk about what we've seen from that data so far at a high level, talk a little bit about accessibility too. But first, this is what we're looking at. So starting in 2014, about 3,600 vehicles affiliated with Uber's companies in New York. And yesterday, over 42,000. And I say yesterday, so something that's really important about all the data that I'm going to show you guys today, it's all from our open data that we put on the city's open data portal. And I think this is great because it allows you guys to fact check the research that we do, and it also allows much more research to be done than we can do in our small city agency. But yeah, these numbers are pulled from that portal as of yesterday, 42,000. So we're looking at over 1,000% increase since 2014, and over 65% or over 48% in just this year alone. Year's not over. Overall, in the non-taxi market, we've seen an increase from about 47,000 to almost 80,000 vehicles since 2014. So what's happened? Well, that's happened. Well, this is a look at our yellow taxi trips per day, the average over the months starting from 2010 until June of this year. So we're seeing a 23% decrease in daily trips since 2013. And one of the thoughts in the beginning of seeing this trend was, well, it's the new green taxis that you guys introduced. They're stealing away some of that work from the yellow taxis. But when you add them in, which they started operating around late 2013, you see maybe that's true. They're providing about the same level of service combined in the beginning, and then they both sort of fall off together. So that's really not what's going on. And really what's the biggest changes happened since 2014, where of that 23% decrease, actually 19% decrease from 2014. So most of it's happened since then. So let's focus on that time period. And when we look there, obviously the first thing is, well, what's going on with Uber? And at first, maybe not so much, but much more recently, you can definitely see that really large increase in trips that are being provided by Uber. As of June, so we have more recent data which we'll publish soon, but sorry to give you guys some stale data here, but as of June, 178,000 daily trips being provided on Uber's platform. Today, we're seeing days that are over 200,000 trips. Compare this with taxis where they're in the low 300,000 trips per day these days. And the trips are, they've really doubled year over year in every month of this year. So just incredible growth that we're seeing. And then when you add on some other folks that you guys are aware of, Lyft and Via, who actually have a little bit different business models, especially Via, which I would say is a real ride-share platform, because ride-sharing is not when some person drives you around and they weren't trying to go there to begin with. It's when two people either share a ride together or when someone actually is headed in that direction, like old-fashioned carpooling, and you share that ride. So between Lyft and Via, Lyft was doing about 36,000 trips in June per day, and Via close to 20,000, and these guys have grown as well. So, one of the other players we're not seeing on here is Juno, which is really a fast emerging and growing platform as well. Also a little bit different in that, their business model to attract drivers is that they've given them a larger cut of the fares and promised to make them shareholders if they provide enough service. And we've seen a huge increase there. Lots of new trips being provided, or are they new? So when we break it down by borough, it starts to get a little more interesting. So in Manhattan, the pie hasn't really grown that much since 2014. When you look at all of these yellow, green, Uber, Lyft, Via combined, it's barely higher than where taxis were almost by themselves pre-2014. So when you look there, 107,000 of those 178,000 daily trips on Uber are actually in Manhattan alone. About a third of Lyft trips, 10,000, are in Manhattan. And all of Via's, because Via until recently operated solely in Manhattan, they're pushing into Brooklyn, to the airports. But as of when this data is current, all of their trips happening in Manhattan. When we start to look at the boroughs, a different story starts to emerge. So when we look at Brooklyn, for instance, we're seeing nearly 250% growth in Uber from last year. They're doing about 40,000 trips per day there. Lyft doing about 11,000 trips per day. A similar but not quite as crazy phenomenon going on in Queens. The percentage growth much higher, 200 or just higher than in Brooklyn. 257% growth in Queens year over year with 25,000 trips. About 31,000 total trips on apps are happening in Queens now. An interesting question here is, well, how much of that's actually happening at the airports? Only about 9,000 of those 31,000 are actually happening at JFK and LaGuardia. And actually still, taxis remain the dominant force for trips from the airports. We're looking at about 67% of those trips that start either in taxi or app are provided by yellow taxis at JFK, and about 70% of those trips originating at LaGuardia Airport. when we look to the other boroughs, yeah, I mean, I look at, first, you'll see what's interesting here is a higher level of service provided by green taxis that sort of tapers off. And what we suspect this is some of the activity happening off of the meter in those green taxis in the Bronx. We've heard from people who say they like to street hail, sure, but they like to negotiate the fare and figure that out before they get in the car. And so when those trips are paid in cash, there's not quite that incentive to log it into the meter. And I think this is a really important thing that I definitely stress when talking to students, academics, anyone, when we're talking about our data, is that, you know, the data can tell you a lot, but you also have to think about what is the data not telling me. And this would be an instance, an example of one of those things that maybe the data is not telling us the whole story in the Bronx, because those cars are all still out there, and what are they doing? But if you're looking at the app trips, definitely a remarkable increase in trips in Uber and Lyft combined, about 360% growth over last year. And hey, let's not leave Staten Island out. I mean, you can barely see it even after I rescaled it. But basically 0 taxi activities happened on Staten Island, and that continues today. We'll see what happens in the days to come. So, you know, a small amount of trips, about 750 trips per day in Staten Island. So this is really interesting just to see from like a borough perspective what's going on. Again, what's not here, what I'm not showing, and it's not on purpose, it's not meant to be deceptive, but is our community car service changes. So, you know, is this new service that's happening out in the boroughs, or is this simply a shift from a mom and pop car service or a Dial 7 or a Carmel that's now happening on one of these apps? And you know, we started collecting this data in 2015. And each of the around 900 for-hire vehicle-based companies that we license and regulate submits that data to us. They collect the data and they submit it to us monthly. So, you know, it's been an uphill battle first to get that data, to ensure the integrity of that data, and then we can really start to look in and see some of those deeper trends. And I promise you that's stuff that we're looking into now. So that sort of talks about geographic access, right? But I think the more important access question is on, you know, accessibility for people with disabilities, especially passengers in wheelchairs in the city. And you know, one of the great things that we've done in the taxi side is that we've committed to having 50% of our yellow taxis be accessible to passengers in wheelchairs by 2020. And you know, sort of as a regulator, our job is to, you know, correct where the market sort of fails, and this is definitely an instance of that. We know that these vehicles cost a little bit more to purchase, that they cost a little bit more to upkeep, and that they cost a little bit more for the driver in terms of gas. And so acknowledging that, we started a 30-cent fee in 2015 on all taxi trips, which sort of goes right back into the industry. So it goes into the industry both as upfront money for owners, so they can sort of keep their vehicle costs stable, and also for drivers. So today, if you drive an accessible yellow taxi, you get 50 cents per trip extra for every passenger. And it doesn't have to be a passenger in a wheelchair, because the point of that is to get the vehicles out there and on the road, because when they're on the road, then they're available for passengers in wheelchairs. You know, one of the other things that we've done as a city agency is we started in 2012. We fully launched our our Manhattan Accessible Dispatch Program, and this was a centralized dispatch program to enable a passenger in a wheelchair to order up an accessible yellow taxi. You know, there were many fewer out there back then. You know, just over 200 of them on the road. But we wanted to be able to connect those passengers with that available supply of vehicles. And as the supply has gone up, we're seeing the wait times go down. So that's great. That's what we want to see as a city. That's a metric we can measure because we have the data. So, you know, in terms of the data, we both use it to measure things like wait time. We use it to look at the number of trips that are being performed by these vehicles, because we're not going to waste, you know, government money on a vehicle that doesn't spend any time on the road. So we're both auditing to make sure these vehicles are on the road. We're using those trip records to find those drivers that are providing trips, and we're paying them per trip. So we're not just using the data to look at the trends, we also use the data to implement our policies and to audit our policies. So I think what the obvious question here is, Uber, Lyft, these companies are pushing out into the boroughs. That's great. People in the boroughs need accessible service too. So what do they have to do? And that's something we're definitely giving tons of thought to. And sort of where we are right now in our thinking is to not set a % of vehicles on the road, because those number of vehicles will continue to grow, and we might have too much supply, too little. And really, it comes back to the same issue, the same reason why we have that 50-cent fee or the 50-cent subsidy for drivers who are on the road, is we want those vehicles on the road. We don't want vehicles purchased and just sitting around. And so every company, when they send out a trip, whether that's through an app or through radio dispatch or through a website, that they send a certain percentage of their trips to a vehicle that's wheelchair accessible. And what this does, and what we hope it will do, is get those vehicles out there on the road in circulation, so that when a passenger in a wheelchair does want that service, it's available to them. This is an idea that we're still talking with advocates, we're talking with the city legislators and thinking about how we can implement it, but we definitely see, as this is our fastest growing, really only growing segment at this point, that we need to be able to provide service options for everybody. Not every passenger in a wheelchair, wants to take a taxi, just like not every able-bodied person wants to take a taxi. Maybe they want the Uber experience. Maybe they want to use their car service. And expanding this requirement out to those companies will make it so people have more choices. We think that's what true equity really would be in this space. Happy to take your questions at the end, of course, and definitely check out our website, nyc.gov/TLC research. This is where we put all of our links to our data, where we put a lot of our reports. And thank you, Matt and everyone, and looking forward to your questions after this.